Secretary Sigolo, Ambassador Barreto, Ambassador Maria Helena Pinheiro, President Simos Leal, Professor Claudio Valeggio, visiting scholars, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This conference at Yale, Brazilian Studies in the United States, The Road Ahead, marks one of the most comprehensive reviews of studies of Brazil in the United States to be undertaken since the first doctoral degrees were awarded in American universities for studies of Brazil almost 70 years ago, and the first International Colloquium of Luso-Brazilian Studies met in October 1950 at the Library of Congress with the presence of such figures as Sérgio Buarque de Holanda, José Honorio de Rodrigues, Cecília Meirelles, Helen Caldwell, Ralph Dimmick, and Antonio Quenchler. Recent research by Darlene Sadlier in her book Americans All follows a generation of Brazilian intellectuals invited to the United States in the 1940s and 50s under the Good Neighbor policy, whose presence set the stage for the wave of visiting professors teaching in U.S. universities under the NDEA Act of 1959. Studies of Brazil in that first phase in our universities belong primarily to the social sciences, and in 1966, historian Robert Levine published a guide to research titled Brazil Field Research Guide in the Social Sciences. The first comprehensive study of Brazilianists, as scholars of Brazil came to be called, was José Carlos Sebe Boumeh's 1990 book of interviews, A Colônia Brasilianista, the Brazilianist colony. Today's Yale conference comes almost 20 years after the meetings at the Brazilian Embassy in Washington, D.C. in 1999 under Ambassador Paulo Tarso Flecha de Lima, whose objective was to establish interaction with the academic community in the United States on an official level, and which gave rise to the publication of O Brasil dos Brasilianistas, Guia dos Estudos sobre o Brasil nos Estados Unidos, 1945 a 2000, and its counterpart in English, Envisioning Brazil, A Guide to Brazilian Studies in the United States, 1945-2000. Those binational studies continue to be limited in scope to the humanities, arts, social sciences, education, and library science. The last general review of studies of Brazil in the United States was conducted in 2005 by the Brazilian Studies Association with the aim of assessing and promoting traditional fields of study. For the first time, and distinct from previous meetings on Brazilian studies, the Yale Conference assigns priority to the sciences, particularly public health, medicine, and the environment, alongside the humanities, arts, and social sciences. In addition, our purpose is to provide structural models for the study of Brazil in the United States based on active collaborative research tied to institutions in Brazil. Our aim is to establish linkages that will aid future researchers recognize their work in both countries and provide a framework for associations among scholars and institutions for the future. Our work today was prepared by the May conference at Yale, in which more than a dozen specialists on Brazil presented papers on their own research, covering studies in ethnomusicology, anthropology, history, literature, forestry, biomedical research, and public health. For this November event, scholars will debate central questions affecting their research and discuss models for improving binational cooperation, as well as consider the evolving nature of their fields. Our goal is to produce a book on these discussions that will provide helpful advice and directions for another generation of scholars of Brazil and the United States. This conference itself is a collaborative effort between the Ministério da Educação and Yale University. With pleasure, I recognize the presence of the National Deputy Executive Secretary, Felipe Sartori Sigolo. I would like also to thank the personnel of the ministry for receiving me for a planning session in Brasilia in February, and for a second meeting in Rio de Janeiro in July. Supported by UNESCO, this conference is the outcome of many combined efforts. At the Ministry of Education, I would like to recognize Minister Carla Barroso Carneiro, assisted by Maria Aureliana Pinto Diniz and Gustavo Servilla, who's here today. Thanks also to Dr. Sérgio Guerra, Dean of the Law School of the Fundação Getúlio Vargas, for our productive meeting in July, which led to the participation by the Foundation and the presence of its president. This conference could not have been organized without the truly efficient and perceptive organization of Ms. Asia Napani of Yale's Council of Latin American and Iberian Studies, assisted by Blair Nelson and Daniel Juarez, and in Brasilia by Gustavo Servilla. Our work at Yale for Brazil in Connecticut has enjoyed the support of the Brazilian consulate in Hartford and Ambassador Fernando Melo Barreto, for which we are especially grateful. It has been an honor for me to work with all of you in organizing the road ahead, and I would like to welcome especially the many scholars and specialists on Brazil about whose experience and collaborative research we will soon learn. Yale has a long and memorable role in Brazilian studies. In 1908, Brazil's first ambassador to the United States, Joaquim Nabuco, came to campus for 2 lectures, The Place of Camões in Literature and The Spirit of Nationality in Brazil. Nabuco's choice of the Camõian epic is evidence that literature nourished his relationship with political culture, which he understood in aesthetic parameters. Carolina Nabuco wrote in her biography, quote, "To reveal Camões to the Americans was to promote the Portuguese language and to treat one of his favorite subjects. The love of Camões that at age 20 had inspired his first book, Camões e os Lusíadas, accompanied him his whole life." End of quote. Nabuco's presentation on nationality shares its content with Machado de Assis in his famous essay, Instinct of Nationality, seeing in Brazilian life a recapitulation sui generis of the great archetypes of Western civilization. He thought that universal values of culture had to be built over a long period of apprenticeship rather than simply located in national identity. For Nabuco's imagination, Brazil is one of the stages of the human drama, and he its spectator. In recognition of Nabuco's lectures at Yale, the seminar, Joaquim Nabuco at Yale, Statesman, Author, Ambassador, a centenary symposium commemorating the lectures at Yale in 1908, brought scholars and many members of the Nabuco family to Yale in April of 2008. Today, in recognition of Nabuco's love of Camões, the Beinecke Rare Books and Manuscripts Library exhibited the first edition of Os Lusíadas and the Rimas. Advancement of studies of Brazil and the Portuguese language at Yale date from the late 19th century with the philologist and medievalist Henry Rosamund Lang, and continued with such scholar teachers as Malcolm Batchelor, Haroldo de Campos, Richard Morris, and Amelia Duarte da Costa. We owe our accomplishments as scholars of Brazil to several generations of U.S. Brazilianistas whose work and dedication to Brazilian studies has brought us to this point today. In 1938, for example, American anthropologist Ruth Landis traveled alone to Salvador, Bahia for a year's research, and in her book, City of Women, commented on the restrictive policies she encountered. At the same time, she expressed her admiration for and confidence in the Brazilian people and her admiration for its liberal social attitudes in comparison with the U.S. at the time. In the 54 years since I first visited Brazil, I have seen many changes and difficulties. However, I continue to be fascinated by Brazilian literature, and like other Brazilianistas who are committed to the study of Brazil, I have confidence in the road ahead. On behalf of the Portuguese program and Brazilian Studies at Yale, I welcome you here and wish you a successful conference and a memorable visit to Yale. Thank you very much.